Can't see you wearing anything from the 1904 range.
The FIFA 1904 fashion range has been launched this week. Cashmere overcoat for you, Rob?
Crisp office-appropriate shirts and tailored blazers.
I am in the market for a functional luxury brand. So this was a launch in New York featuring stars like, drumroll legends, Dennis Wise, strutting his stuff in the new FIFA 1904 brand. I mean, why not, I guess. When you think of FIFA, though, all those people around the world looking to get a cashmere overcoat or a embossed shirt.
Interestingly, the kind of fashion company behind this, V-Files, the founder of that is Julie Ann Key, is also the owner of Barnsley Football Club, the old mining town in South Yorkshire. So, Barnsley, New York, Hong Kong, Milan, it's all there.
Functional luxury fashion.
Barnsley, the centre of the fashion industry. It does make some sense for FIFA if they are licensing out the brand. How many people do you see buying World Cup branded merchandise around the world? Could take off.
Could do. But when you see that stuff, it's around the countries and the tournaments, not necessarily the governing body. But Julianne Key, who Ziggs just mentioned, thinks it can be $1 billion brand by the 2030 World Cup. She sees these people who are around football, these executives, and thinks they're very well-dressed people. Why doesn't FIFA launch its own brand? So that's what they've done.
1904, obviously referring to the year that FIFA was established.
2025 referring to a rebirth with the launch of the Club World Cup. $995 for a cashmere blend overcoat. It is something about the Premier League, very known, recognisable Lyon brand, but you don't really see its merchandise on sale. So maybe they're missing an opportunity, Premier League, for a season on one. But they're not selling any Crocs.
Well, they should get FIFA branded Crocs for the poor sniffer dogs who've been having to wear them this week to protect their paws against the searing heat of the pavements or the sidewalks, as they say in the States. Because it has been so crazily hot there, literally they've been wearing these Crocs, the ventilated clogs strapped onto their paws to protect them.
Pictures are what make that story as well. This German Shepherd or Alsatian there in the pink Crocs. It is quite an arresting image, isn't it? And it tells you a lot in terms of, obviously, the heat the dogs are suffering from, trying to protect the fans, but also the temperatures the players are going to face in the furnace of those stadiums.
Something we'll get into as we reflect in this episode on week 2 of the Club World Cup and so much more. Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. As ever, we're grateful if you can spread the word of the pod, hit subscribe, rate and review us, send the link around. And we'll get into the Club World Cup in a bit, but it's been a landmark week at the International Olympic Committee. Kirsty Coventry taking charge, her first week. We've had the inauguration, her first executive board meeting, and perhaps no surprise, which issue has dominated?
Well, it's an easy PR win, isn't it? The whole transgender women in women's competition issue.
Yeah. Kirsty Coventry has said essentially that she wants to protect the women's category. But what does that mean in detail? Did she outline exactly how she plans to protect the women's category?
Well, initially, she's setting up a task force, and this is what she had to say.
On the protection of the female category, it was very, very clear from the members that we have to protect the female category, first and foremost. We have to do that to ensure fairness. But we need to do that with a scientific approach and with the inclusion of working with the international federations, whom have already done a lot of work in this area. So we need to bring in the experts. That will take a little bit of time. We need to bring in the international federations so that we have full buy-in to trying to come up with cohesion on this specific topic.
Well, that's Kirsty Coventry after the executive board meeting. You can see where she's leaning towards talking about protecting sporting fairness. But when I interviewed her the day after her election in March, she did reflect on the differences between sports. So saying in equestrian, you wouldn't gain advantage if you were a trans woman taking part in that competition, in her belief.
Well, no, because in equestrian competitions, men and women compete together. So that's I suppose that's an obvious one where it wouldn't have any effect.
Yeah, I think Rob, you mentioned this last week when we did the pod. She wants to do I can't remember the phrase. Was it look and listen, pause and reflect? Yeah. So presumably this is going to be part of the pause and reflect, and that's going to be slightly different in terms of strategy.
And this is a notable shift from the Thomas Bach era. At the Olympics last year, he was saying, if your passport says you're a woman, you are a woman. So the debate has shifted. Is it because of Kirsty Coventry's own beliefs? Donald Trump, in terms of him making it such a big election of his presidency? Sebastian Coe was talking about it very forcefully during his IOC election campaign as well. Or is it reflecting where Kirsty Coventry sees the world changing and what she's experienced as an athlete?
Hard to know in all of that. We'd have to ask her. But the things you've described are true in many ways. Because Kirsty Coventry, one of the things she said, she wanted to engage with her beaten rivals, didn't she? And take whatever was some of their top platform points. And Samaranch, for example, and Co. They had detailed programs, unlike Kirsty in a way. So she may be picking and choosing. And don't forget, World Athletics under Sebastian Coe has rolled out very, very detailed testing for sex, hasn't it? You know, the DNA swabs, etc., have already been announced for that sport. So we'll see if the IOC plans to roll that out further.
Yeah, other big sports have done similar steps, swimming notably. I think probably in the back of her mind, I mean, just obviously don't know this, but just guessing that in the back of her mind, she doesn't want to go to her first Summer Olympics and face a massive furore if there is a similar outcome or incident around the boxing we saw in Paris. So I think that was such a sort of huge controversy and sort of, in many ways, it sort of overshadowed other things in Paris for several days. So I imagine she would be wanting to avoid anything like that, and because that wasn't just a kind of sports story, that was like front pages and campaigners and people like J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, sort of weighing in. So it's a fairly easy one to do because a lot of the major sports have already brought in such measures.
And Donald Trump, of course, giving his own opinions on the Olympic boxing as well. We've been hearing from AIBA this week even saying that medals should be stripped from the Olympic boxing as a result of that and those gender eligibility tests. But this might help FIFA. If the IOC comes to a position, it might help FIFA avoid coming to a stance of its own because it can just say it's a line in behind the IOC, given the fact we're still waiting for FIFA to complete its own review of its gender eligibility policies as they count down to the Women's World Cup in Brazil in 2027, then, of course, the Women's Football Tournament at the Olympics in 2028 in LA.
Yeah, although it would be strange if they just said by doing what the IOC says, because what other of their regulations do they just do what the IOC says? FIFA surely has its own laws of the game and rules and statutes, and I don't think anywhere it says we're doing this just because that's what the IOC say.
And there are those who question why even this is a dominant issue of discussion in the sports world, this dominating the first week of Kirsty Coventry's presidency, the start of this pod as well, when there were no declared transgender women at the Olympics last year in Paris. But it's going to be a big issue that perhaps defines the start of the Kirsty Coventry presidency. But it's often where the Olympics goes that a lot of the public engage in.
Yeah, well, it's not the only big issue as well. That Kirsty Coventry will also have to mark herself out as a president in her own right, because, during the election there was those suggestions, perhaps unfairly, that, she's Thomas Bach's chosen one and effectively is someone designed to cement his legacy and will be very similar. But so far, I think she has appeared to be her own person, and that's been quite refreshing to see. And on another issue where she seems to be breaking with Thomas Bach, pausing and reflecting, is on how Olympic host cities are picked. Because there's a lot of controversy over Bach, the Bach system, the recent one, of almost a no-bid Olympics, where the IOC itself will choose a preferred candidate of one and effectively say to the membership, what do you think? And typically they roll in behind him. And this one in particular was really brought into focus when Brisbane, which is home, certainly Australia is home of the powerful former vice president of the IOC, John Coates, a Bach ally, was given the 2032 hosting rights. So she seems to be saying, hang on, we're going to look at how this is done. And in the campaign, the IOC members wanted a bigger say. So maybe we're going to go back to something more transparent when it comes to Olympic host city choices.
Yeah, another working group, stroke task force, whatever you want to call it, being set up to look at that.
India had been seen as one of the leading contenders to host the 2026 Games. In fact, a bid team from India is due at the IOC next week, and Nita Ambani is a very influential IOC member. They're huge family conglomerate that's investing in sports as well. Suggestions, actually, India would finally get an Olympics. Also, Qatar in the running, having been sidestepped and overlooked for 2032.
I think it's interesting that they are going to look at this bid process again, because traditionally it had been 7 years before Games was held that the announcement was made, the decision was made. Thomas Bach scrapped that, and so it was going to be whenever the IOC president effectively and his executive decided. And also, I think a lot of these members felt completely excluded from the process. What's the point of being an IOC member if you don't actually have a say in the most important thing, perhaps, where these events are going to take place?
And the same pattern we've noticed with FIFA, haven't we? So the way the 2030 World Cup was dished out to the, 3 continents, 6 countries, and then paving the way for Saudi Arabia to be delivered the 2034 World Cup, and effectively a rubber stamping by the Congress.
And the UK also benefiting from that process to get the 2035 Women's World Cup, and the US for the 2031 Women's World Cup as well. Again, when I interviewed Kirsty Coventry after her election in March, it was one of the notable points she recognised, the fact members do want to have a say again on these matters rather than it being behind the scenes closed-door deals. But someone she couldn't discuss face-to-face with this about directly was one of the IOC members, Gianni Infantino. He didn't make it to Lausanne for the inauguration this week. Obviously busy with the Club World Cup.
Perhaps he was too busy meeting JD Vance.
The US Vice President, of course, on this FIFA World Cup task force, and I think he attended a game this week. What also happened during the Club World Cup, speaking of meeting these members, as Martyn referenced, I think that was Martyn's talking about showing up late in Paraguay for the FIFA Congress a few weeks ago. What has happened, though, is FIFA has rolled out the red carpet for those members in Miami, so they can attend and speak to Gianni Infantino there. A little bit of making up and making people feel welcome again, courtesy of the FIFA president.
Hopefully they're finding some good protection in the air conditioning, because we mentioned about Kirsty Coventry and where the 2036 Olympics goes. Obviously, if they were to go to the Middle East for the first time, it would require a shift in the calendar for the Games. Perhaps they couldn't be staged in July and August. But some are starting to question, well, what about this World Cup next year in North America, particularly with the heat of the United States? We started by mentioning the dogs requiring Crocs on their feet. There will start to be questions about how safe the conditions are for players. And some questions, would we have focused more on the heat if it was a Mid-East country hosting? Obviously, it'd be a lot hotter there, perhaps, in the 40s. We are talking deep into the 30s in some parts of the US, even into the evening, aren't we?
Yeah, 38 degrees, I think it was, when Benfica played Bayern Munich, and humid too. So, not surprisingly, some of the matches have been sort of walking football almost because it's been so hot. I think it's a really big issue for the World Cup. And I don't think the European teams are going to do very well as a result, because I just, after the end of a long season, intense season in Europe, and then they're suddenly faced with these sort of conditions. Very few stadiums have got any temperature controls. Some of them are completely open, so the fans don't have any cover either. I think it's going to be very challenging, but it's so be it.
Yeah, it's also the nature of what's happening around the world. I don't imagine it being much cooler, say in Spain, in June 2030, for example. I mean, you try to go to somewhere like Seville in July or June or July. It's hard enough to walk around in places like this, and also we've got games in Morocco as well, and Portugal. This is something that sport is going to have to confront. The idea of mitigation, we got cooling breaks, putting an ice towel on the necks of players again, but in terms of the best conditions to play a football tournament, they're just not going to be there. And then we go back to the thorny old question of football calendars, etc. And there's no point, we talk about it so much. People know the arguments around that.
Of course, it's not exactly the first time a World Cup's been held in North America. There would have been questions about the heat in 1970 in Mexico as well.
And 1994 World Cup. Don't forget, the final was played in Pasadena between Brazil and Italy. And it was an early kickoff there, early in the afternoon in Pasadena, that stadium which is being used at the Club World Cup in California. As Martyn said, one of those that is completely open. It's a beautiful arena, but this time of year, that game, wow, that was 0-0 into extra time, baking sun. That was not a football match. That was a game of attrition that Brazil ended up winning on penalties back then. And conditions, if anything, have got worse.
Yeah, I suppose there's been global warming since then. That's for sure. An issue, but we've had the sight of like Borussia Dortmund substitutes been staying inside their dressing rooms rather than come and sit in the dugout because it's been too hot, which is unprecedented. I've never seen that before.
No.
Well, Gianni Infantino was in Orlando to watch Manchester City's victory over Juventus, and on his Instagram video after the match, his own match summary, he did reference the heat. So I think you can tell from that video, Gianni Infantino knows there's quite discussion, maybe bristling at the fact it's become a topic of debate, also emphasising that the stadium was full. So clearly they're not liking this focus on empty stadiums. And if you look at the average attendance for the group phase, it's about 35,000, the one declared by FIFA, which isn't actually that bad for a new tournament. And in a country with soccer, maybe sport number 4, an average attendance that's exceeding perhaps some of the size of some of the stadiums of the clubs taking part in the tournament. So not a bad average. Maybe it's only contrasted with an expectation management thing, the fact almost it was built up as potentially being completely full.
Yeah, I think we talked about last week about the size of the venues that have been used. I mean, interesting. There's just happened to notice back in the 1990 World Cup, in the knockout match between England and Belgium, so this is like one of the biggest games of the World Cup, and yet the capacity of that stadium was only 34,000. So there's definitely been this move towards bigger, better stadiums, increased ticket money, blah blah blah. But I think for a tournament which is just being launched like this one, it's challenging.
Interestingly, it was in a piece by Barney Rowan in The Guardian that was very critical of Gianni Infantino and his style of presidency and his political relationships. that he did make one point in that, saying that the dismay at the 3,500 turning up to Mamelodi Sundowns versus Ulsan HD in Orlando overlooks the upside, the fact that 3,500 people actually turned up to Mamelodi Sundowns versus Ulsan HD in Orlando, and pointing out the Sundowns normally get about 9,000 even at home, and pointing out the cost of South Africans travelling to the United States.
Yeah, but you could argue the same thing during a World Cup. I remember going to watch a game between Angola and Iran in Berlin, or was it Leipzig, in a full stadium there. And again, the point isn't, it's the occasion. Because Gianni Infantino has been saying that each of these World Cup games are like a Super Bowl. So it's the sense that it's not the average Mamelodi Sundowns game, isn't it? It's a Club World Cup game which has been called by FIFA the best of the best. And, sure, 3,000 people showed up for that, but that doesn't scream best of the best.
Leipzig it was, Tariq, 2006. I was at that game.
Yeah,
Were
fun.
you as a fan or as a reporter?
I went with my brother. We had a really nice time, yeah. It was good.
Obviously, we're now into the knockout phase. I'm sure we can expect far fuller stadiums, and maybe they become actually the overriding latter stages images of the tournament. But something we haven't heard from Gianni Infantino on is the racist abuse that Antonio Rudiger, the Real Madrid player, alleges that he suffered at the hands of Pachuca captain Gustavo Cabral. Now, they have opened disciplinary proceedings, but Cabral was able to play in his team's final group stage match before they were eliminated, before any sort of completion of that investigation.
Yeah, certainly weren't rushing to get that done and dusted while the club was still in the tournament, that's for sure. We also saw actually the first use of this cross-arms gesture by the referee to alert people that a allegation of racism had been made by a player. But it did highlight the fact, doesn't it, the fact that FIFA, as we talked last week, that FIFA hasn't been running this constant daily anti-discrimination campaign for whatever reason. And yet now you have a situation which I don't think we've ever seen in a Club World Cup, certainly not recently, where we've had a player alleging racism by another player.
Yeah. In light of what we discussed previously, Adam Crafton's story in The Athletic a week or so ago, where the plan to roll out the campaign had been, I guess, muffled in some way. And then it seems like it then came to life again following the story's publication about anti-discrimination inside stadiums. And then we have this situation, which has kind of not really been talked about by the FIFA brass. And again, the context is the politics. It's hard to overlook that, isn't it?
And perhaps it shines a light on the media as well, because, as you say, it seems unprecedented. A player alleging race abuse by another player at a FIFA Club World Cup, perhaps at any FIFA World Cup like this. And yet it didn't really take off as an issue the media has been scrutinising around the world as well. Say, compared to when there's been instances in La Liga, it hasn't, if there was a lot more rigorous sort of questioning of FIFA perhaps on this, they would feel more under pressure to comment, but it's not become a global talking point. And maybe in part it's often reflective of what else is happening around the world, and given the fact it has been a week dominated by the US-Israel-Iran conflict.
Yeah, I would also say the context as well. I've been looking at media coverage of this event. I think in Europe, it's fair to say it's there. There is coverage, but it's not like wall to wall club work compared to, say, Brazil, which incredibly 4 teams have qualified through the group stage into the knockouts. If you look at a Brazilian sports website, the only thing you see is Club World Cup, absolutely everywhere. So is it front of mind as an event? Yes, in certain parts of the world, perhaps not so much in others. And the Rudiger story, it was visible in some sense. We saw it. I mean, you see it in English language media. It was covered. But was it this massive story? No, it isn't. And again, we have to see what the outcome of the case is, I guess. This isn't like hundreds of fans chanting racist abuse, showering a player, is it? So it's slightly different. We'll see what the outcome is.
Under FIFA guidelines, it would be a 10-game minimum ban if they do punish Cabral.
He's denied saying anything racist. He said the expletive rant called Rudiger a coward, which is different to what Rudiger thinks he heard.
And as we know, often linguistic experts are brought in to dissect the language in these types of cases. Well, that's the Club World Cup as it heads into the knockout phase. It might be the off-season in most parts of European football, but UEFA are certainly busy dealing with the eligibility of teams for next season's competitions, and Lyon in France dealing with their financial cases as well, and deciding to relegate Lyon.
John Textor, the American businessman, multi-club owner, Botafogo, part owner of Crystal Palace, although he's agreed a deal to sell those shares, and Lyon, who he spent an incredible amount of money buying in 2022, almost 900 million euros, including taking over the debts. And they've been in a financial basket game almost ever since. They've now run into trouble after several warnings, and they've been relegated by the French league.
Yeah, the Lyon purchase was mind-boggling at the time. The number didn't stack up, but you look at Textor and you think, how much of his own money has he spent on any of this stuff? And it's very little. He's borrowed huge amounts of money from Ares Capital, private equity fund. There's a bond on the stadium there in Lyon with Goldman Sachs, I think 300 million. I think there's another investor on the hook for 75 million. So he's built this network of clubs. You mentioned them. There's I think another one in Belgium, Molenbeek as well. And his plan was to bundle them all together into this Eagle Holdings and try to list them, an IPO in New York, which would value this group of clubs, very disparate group of clubs, at 2 billion. And that's how John Textor planned to get rich off of football. Now, this is looking very unlikely at this point, isn't it? You've got this man in dire straits here, but more importantly, you've got these clubs in dire straits. We've got mentioned Crystal Palace and whether they're going to be playing in Europe next season, still to come. Lyon, massive team in France, now relegated to the second division for off-field affairs linked to their finances. There was some questionable trading between Molenbeek and Lyon a couple of years ago with players. This isn't hard to see how any of this is good for football. Is this the type of owner, whether Textor or others with this type of plan, that are a help or a hindrance for European football or global football?
The way the French rules work, it's not just purely about how much debt a team is in, not about how big their losses are. They assess the overall financial viability of the club. And yes, they're reported to have debts of 175 million euros, but they do look at the broader state of the business, don't they, in terms of, well, how sustainable are the losses? How sustainable is the debt to be able to fund things going forward? And Lyon insists that they do have substantial cash resources available to them.
Yeah, they've got an appeal July the 5th coming up. I don't think it's nailed on that the relegation will be enforced, but I think it's highly likely. Just looking at the figures involved and the warnings they've had. Actually, I mean, UEFA booted them out of the Europa League in December and then reinstated them after some sort of guarantees were given and provided. But it just looks like it's sort of they've run out of tarmac.
It'd be great to know what type of guarantees that the UEFA FFP group would accept, because this obviously happened before this licensing body. For me, a case of transparency again. We don't know how UEFA strikes these deals. We just get an announcement saying this group has been cleared. Now, what must be different from the French group to the UEFA group? It's the same set of finances. And again, I would request, hopefully, UEFA in future provide a lot more details to fans about how this stuff works.
And Lyon, perhaps a team that has struggled under the weight of the Qatari funding of Paris Saint-Germain. They were perennial French champions on the men's side. On the women's side, they've actually just won a fourth title in a row in France, also winning the Champions League back in 2022. But obviously, we've seen that friction between John Textor and Nasser Al-Khelaifi as well.
There was a famous fallout, wasn't there, between Nasser Al-Khelaifi and John Textor at a League One clubs meeting, which was leaked, and fair to say a healthy exchange of views, but it does sound like they've sort of gone on better terms recently. But John Textor is a maverick, and in this issue about whether Crystal Palace could play in the Europa League next season because of a multi-club ownership issue, with Textor owning 43% of that club and Lyon being in the Europa League. He went to a meeting of the Club Financial Control Board with Steve Parish, the Palace owner, and from what I understand, he was told or asked in a way to try and help him, saying, "Mr. Textor, we understand you don't really have much involvement in the decision-making process at Palace." He said, "No, I do. I played a key role in appointing the new manager." So
Yeah. It's been bandied about that it's him who picked Glasner, even though a lot of people are suggesting that might not have been the case. But it does give you he's a showman. And he seems to be enjoying this. And let the chips fall where they may. It's a trail of destruction in a way behind John Textor, who Nasser Al-Khelaifi famously described as a cowboy, and then he showed up wearing a Stetson.
Yeah, maybe he still wants to claim some of the credit for appointing Glasner and then winning the FA Cup for the first major trophy, not wanting his role to be completely sidelined. But it seemed the most conveniently helpful outcome, this, with Lyon finishing sixth, so they would have got the Europa League place potentially ahead of Crystal Palace. Now with them being relegated, that it should align for Crystal Palace to take that, regardless of UEFA having to decide on whether or not Textor's sale of his stake to Woody Johnson in time was enough to facilitate their position in the Europa League alongside Lyon. But you might still have grievances from Ireland, with Drogheda kicked out of the Conference League because of their shared ownership with the Danish club Silkeborg. You can't have two clubs with the same ownership in the same competition, and they did appeal to CAS but then lost.
Yeah, but the question would also be, Lyon have been relegated by Ligue 1 into the second division in France, but have they been relegated by UEFA?
Well, to me, that season never happened. You qualified then through your league place. That league place doesn't exist, and then it's for the French Federation to ratify it, isn't it? Because they provide the licensing for European competitions.
But it doesn't seem to be a points deduction or anything. They haven't licensed them to play in the first division next season, I think. We'll get the details here, but for me, this is a licensing issue for next season, and maybe Ziegs, you got some information here?
yeah, I think that the way, I mean, I don't know, but I think the way it is that it will be viewed as they were relegated, and therefore that they can't go into the Europa League or European competition. The fact that Textor sold his shares to Woody Johnson is too late anyway, so they had to do it before March the 1st. There's nothing in the UEFA rules which state you can do it after the deadline. So that would have been a problem for Palace. I think if Lyon are relegated and it's confirmed, Crystal Palace get to stay in the Europa League.
Yeah,
I think if they aren't and they're allowed to back into League One, then Palace drops down to the Conference League, because although Brøndby is owned by this company which David Blitzer, the Palace co-owner, also owns, I think there's enough other people involved in Brøndby for the Danish club to also be allowed to play in that competition. So very complicated.
right. But this raises like bigger questions around these multi-club groups. And now there's three that have been really. Textor's one we've just gone into great detail in.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons why clubs want to team up. You can, if you have a financial fair play regime, you can push some of your costs into that multi-club ownership parent company. But yeah, you're right. It causes lots of problems as well, and it just feels very messy.
Another MCO group we talked about a few months ago in unflattering terms was 777 Partners as they tried to buy Everton, fronted by this guy, Josh Wander, quite brash businessman, also based in Florida, like John Textor. Everton fans obviously breathing a sigh of relief that deal collapsed and effectively 777 also collapsed. But the repercussions are huge all over the world because 777 owned majority or controlling stakes or complete clubs in the likes of Standard Liège in Belgium. You've got Genoa, very historic club in Italy, Hertha Berlin. You have Red Star of Paris and Vasco da Gama, one of the great Rio clubs, also now, on the hook as a result of this. And this comes after this guy was getting a lot of press. I remember an interview he gave to the Financial Times in which he asked, is there anyone in the world that's more serious about buying football clubs in history than Josh Wander? Well, football will hope there isn't anyone like Josh Wander who's interested in buying football clubs because the trail of destruction that has followed.
This does seem like a bigger conversation that football needs to have, as you do get a proliferation of clubs under the same ownership and the fact that you can get these synergies around the world. Seen it in cricket, the fact that franchise owners want to sort of spread their players perhaps across the globe as well and build a global footprint. So it's a question of how you can viably build up a global umbrella of clubs, but then deal with the fact that there might be issues when they come under the same competition, because you can't have two clubs with the same ownership coming up against each other, say in a Champions League final or a FIFA Club World Cup final.
Yeah, this question of synergies as well, that's what the rationale has always been. But we haven't actually seen that come to pass in a way that is useful beyond, as Zieg said, in a way, helping one club out with a financial fair play problem, maybe. It's like in terms of like anything positive, a positive outcome. It's quite hard to see. Maybe some sharing of knowledge and coaching and improving the coaching at the lesser team, maybe, but hard to see. Hard to see this at the moment.
Sometimes it's portrayed as an ability to give players and coaches experience around the world, to send them out on loan, certain players, but more often not, it's seen as a mechanism to comply with the financial regulations. We mentioned Paris Saint-Germain. One quick bit of news from there in the last week. Another of these sort of celebrity sports star investments in a football club. Kevin Durant, the Phoenix Suns player from the NBA, getting a minority stake in PSG. Another of these minority stakes purchased by a famous American sports star, where we don't actually know how much they've invested, how much their stake is, but gets them a lot of publicity.
Yeah, the famous one was the one you like, Rob, was the Tom Brady and Birmingham City one, I guess. Yeah, it's the ability to engage with more people. So the Kevin Durant fans, there's millions of them. He's a huge star in the NBA. Maybe there isn't the crossover, and now there is. And then you've got a whole new audience there and great for marketing, etc. So, whether he paid €1 for this stake is it'll be interesting to know.
Well, if any major US sports star wants to invest in Sport Unlocked, we can guarantee maximum publicity. Travis Kelce.
Steph Curry.
Very cheap. Yeah, nothing like those sums involved. Well, marketing deals in Saudi Arabia. Is it a marketing deal, a footballing deal? Well, Cristiano Ronaldo is certainly staying there. He's still, obviously scoring, not quite had the success Al Nassr would have hoped with him, but some doubts about what his future would be, but he's there for another couple of years. All sorts of numbers around suggesting it's worth at least more than $500 million, the whole deal.
Yeah, the numbers were anything north of 20 million a month, plus this stake in Al Nassr, which is majority, almost totally owned by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, and Ronaldo gets a bit of that. What that could be worth, God only knows. I mean, hard to value a Saudi Arabian football team. They were all pretty much owned by the state until a few years ago. It's really hard to measure any of the value for Saudi entities at all, isn't it? In the context of how they work, hard to think that Al Nassr has a balanced budget, for example, with paying Ronaldo this enormous sum. But he's he's a big symbol for Saudi Arabia, isn't he? He's not really a footballer in he is, of course, with all the goals and that stuff, but he means so much more. He was the first big one really to arrive there, and he is one of the world's most famous men. He kind of legitimizes the Saudi reform project in many ways. He's the face of it, or at least one of them. So it's very important to them that he stayed there, and they've shown him how he could be comfortable there, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he was, I don't know if he still is, but certainly at one point he was the most followed person on social media in the world, which just shows his reach. So, and he has been the face of the Saudi Professional League, which when he joined, so it would be costly for him to leave, wouldn't it, for the Saudi Premier League? And I think they have to weigh up whether that is the sort of money worth spending. They probably think it is.
Yeah, he certainly joined the project earlier, slightly than some other players. So perhaps there's that sense of loyalty from the Saudis, probably appreciation the fact he did make the jump in 2022 as well.
Yeah, he would have spent 4.5 years there by the end of this contract, I guess. That's quite a big chunk of time there. And of course, he's into his 40s now as well. Yeah, good luck to him. He could be buying a European football team by the end of this with the amount of money he would have tucked away by now.
Well, that's certainly the way we're seeing even Gareth Bale, one of his former teammates at Real Madrid, looking to invest in some form in Cardiff City as well. Well, one thing is, all this, along with the Club World Cup, has meant we are completely dominated still largely by football in this June. And we're still building up to the Women's Euros, although Wimbledon starts as well in the next week.
I've got some big news on Wimbledon. You're probably not aware of this. It's not just the courts that are green. The whole tournament is. So you may sort of have traditionalists turning in their grave, but no avocado being served in Wimbledon anymore. It's crushed peas instead, and no smoked salmon. It's trout. This is all to try and stop or cut down on their impact on the climate, because obviously how avocados are grown is fast becoming a bit of a no-no, and certainly the same with salmon farming. So yeah, it's not mushy peas though; it's crushed peas.
When you said you had big news, Ziegs, I thought, hang on a minute, we got a wild card entry for the men's singles, and M. Ziegler. I've seen that serve.
That'll be for the first paddle slam, but in no way can peas taste like avocado. Strawberries at least still picked fairly locally, so I think they will survive. What would a strawberry replacement be?
No, still strawberries, but there are plant alternatives to cream for whatever. Oat. What do you have? Oat cream, almond cream, maybe. Something like that. Well,
we've already seen the world of cauliflower steaks replacing beef steaks. I didn't imagine an item like avocado would be replaced, but obviously sustainability issues in terms of the travel, bringing them. What will the Australian players in particular have to say?
We should do a menu off between what's being offered in the States right now and this. I'm not going to use any adjective here, and the offering here at Wimbledon, and see how they compare.
Certainly sounds healthier.
Certainly does.
I'd imagine. Well, send your thoughts as ever at Sport Unlocked on all the social platforms, sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. But for now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.